The city of Lagos stretched beyond the waters, glowing in restless neon, but inside the fortress of glass and marble on Banana Island, silence reigned. The Okorie mansion stood like a modern cathedral of wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows catching the moonlight, sculptures imported from Milan, and a private art gallery curated with pieces that only billionaires could afford. In its center lived Nnenna Okorie, a woman whose name resonated not just in Nigerian fashion but across Paris, Milan, and New York. Nnenna was not simply rich, she was influence wrapped in silk, a widow who had turned her grief into an empire. Her fashion house, Nnenna Luxe, had redefined African couture. Each year, her runway shows in Lagos Fashion Week and in Dubai drew critics, celebrities, and royalty. She owned fleets of Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and even a personalized Maybach with her initials embroidered into the seats. Yet as she sat that night in her private study, clad in a flowing satin robe, sipping a delicate glass of South African pinotage, the silence around her felt less like peace and more like a haunting. Because beneath the marble floors and the designer gowns was a hollow wound that had never healed. Obinna, her only son, her pride, the child who once ran through those same glass halls, laughing, filling the mansion with sound, now silenced forever. A car crash had taken him years ago on the Lekki-Epe Expressway. That day, Lagos had stopped for her. Newspapers ran headlines. Socialites flooded her mansion with condolences. But when the lights dimmed and the visitors left, she was left alone with her grief. Her husband had been gone for years before that, and with Obinna's passing, she was left to command the empire with no heir by her side. She buried herself in work, in fabrics, and business deals, pretending that stitches and sequins could cover the wound. That night, the wound reopened with a sound. Her phone rang, a sharp, almost aggressive buzz that cut through the stillness of the mansion. She frowned, glancing at the glowing screen. Unknown number. It was nearly midnight. She almost ignored it, almost dropped the phone back onto her marble desk, but something in her chest tugged at her. She pressed. Answer. A silence stretched for a moment. Then a voice, low and trembling, said words that nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. "Mother, it's me." Her glass nearly slipped from her hand. The room seemed to tilt. For seconds, she could not move, could not breathe. That voice, deep, familiar, and haunting, pierced through her soul. Who is this? Her voice quivered, betraying the iron facade she had worn for years. "It's me, Mother. Obinna." She froze. The name that no one dared say aloud in her presence anymore was now echoing from the small device in her hand. No one knew the cadence of his voice like she did the softness when he called her mother, the little rise at the end as if he wanted to reassure her. "This is not funny," she whispered, her other hand gripping the edge of her desk. "I know you don't believe me," the voice said gently, "but I can prove it. Do you remember the night you sang me to sleep in the garden when Father was away? You told me the stars listened to us, that they carried our voices to him. Only you and I knew that. Mother, I remember." Her knees buckled. That night was their secret. A tender memory after her husband's funeral, something no outsider could have known. Tears burned her eyes. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice breaking, half pleading, half angry. "Why are you doing this to me?" "It's me, Mother," the voice insisted. "I never died. I can explain. But you must trust me." Her heart raced violently. Every instinct told her this could be a cruel scam, the kind that preyed on grief. Yet another part of her, the part that had prayed night after night for one more touch, one more smile, wanted to believe. "Where are you?" she asked, breathless. The line went silent. Then came a static noise. "Mother," the voice said again, softer this time. "Please don't give up on me. I'll find you. I'll show you the truth." And just like that, the call ended. The screen turned black, leaving only her reflection staring back at her, haunted, trembling, desperate. For a long time she stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was a scammer. Yes, it had to be. Someone trying to trick her. But then why did her hands still shake as if she had truly heard Obinna? Why did the memory he evoked feel too precise, too sacred to be fabricated? She pressed her palm against her chest, willing herself to breathe. Around her, the mansion remained silent, cold and vast. The chandelier above sparkled mockingly, like stars out of reach. Then, just as she began to lower the phone, it buzzed again. She gasped, her hand trembling as she looked at the new notification. It wasn't a call this time. It was a message. 4 simple words glowed on the screen. Meet me. I will prove it. Her breath caught. A storm of questions thundered inside her: fear, doubt, longing, and a dangerous flicker of hope. And in that moment, she realized her life would never be the same again. Sleep would not come. The house that usually hummed with discreet efficiency felt cavernous, every polished surface reflecting back fragments of a life she curated to outrun grief. The call had cracked that shell. Nnenna stood by the window, watching the lagoon stain itself silver beneath the moon, and memory opened like a floodgate. Before the boardrooms, before the endorsements, before headlines called her a visionary, there had been mornings of cereal spills and piano scales, soft socks on marble floors, a boy's giggle ricocheting through glass and light everywhere. Obinna had tiny hands that learned confidence early, gripping ivory keys with the seriousness of a conductor. At 5, he performed a hesitant lullaby for guests. At 7, he improvised melodies that made adults exchange surprised glances. At 9, he won a regional recital wearing a crooked bow tie he refused to fix. He laughed with his whole body, collapsing sideways on the piano bench, then looked back to ensure his mother was watching. She always was, lips pressed to hide, pride swelling like bright morning tide inside her quietly. He was designed for rooms larger than childhood. Teachers said he would command stages, stylists predicted he would command runways, consultants whispered he would command markets. Nnenna taught him fitting, drape, and fabric provenance the way other families taught fishing. He mapped her warehouses by smell, naming each section like a city. At 12, he negotiated a supplier discount with unblinking calm. At 14, he critiqued a Paris sample without cruelty, and the atelier chief nodded, chagrined, converted. Her air breathed possibility as casually as air every day around her. The night that stole him arrived ordinary. Rain tapped the awnings, and traffic on the Lekki-Epe expressway grumbled like a tired animal. She had remained at the atelier finalizing beadwork for a Dubai showcase, while he left a study group, texting her a selfie with friends stacked like dominoes behind him. Sirens are only sounds until they carry a name you love. When the call came, her palm went cold, the room tilted. The beaded gown on the mannequin blurred into cruel constellations, and she folded under invisible collapsing news. In the days that followed, Lagos performed its rituals. Black SUVs idled outside the gate, florists ferried white lilies, pastors threaded prayers through rooms filled with perfume and quiet sobbing. Fashion editors arrived wearing dark sunglasses, murmuring words that evaporated as they hugged her. The governor's wife held her hand too long. Photographers waited by the water, their lenses respectful and ravenous. Inside, the mansion became a museum of condolence, each bouquet a timestamp. Nnenna moved through it like an exhibit, curated, fragile, and unbearably visible to herself and history. Work steadied the tremor. She rebuilt the calendar with brutal precision. 5 M. Pilates. 7 A.M. Fittings. 9 A.M. Calls to Milan, noon fabric reviews, afternoon site inspections, evening board strategy. A schedule can be a fortress. Under its weight, mornings became survivable. She launched a scholarship in his name, opened a sleek flagship on Victoria Island, expanded into sustainable textiles, because he once asked about oceans. Applause gathered. Awards multiplied. Still, every triumph hummed with absence, like a speaker vibrating after music stops, stubbornly insisting on silence's shape daily. He had loved small Lagos things too. Boli by the roadside, Agbalumo pulp puckering his cheeks, Owambe drummers practicing in the compound across from theirs on humid Fridays. When PHCN snapped the lights off, he lit candles and turned the outage into theater, playing nocturnes while neighbors clapped from balconies. He promised to pioneer ethical factories where seamstresses would earn as much dignity as executives. Those sentences lived on sticky notes inside her planner. She touched them sometimes, like prayer beads, proof that tenderness could fund ambition even in darkness. The call tonight cut through the years like a tailor's blade. Hearing mother in that timbre was not nostalgia, it was presence. Her mind assembled defenses with corporate efficiency scam, actor, deepfake, grief-induced hallucination, but each fell when the memory he cited stood up, exact and unblemished. Could a stranger know the secret lullaby garden, the constellation she named for him, the way he hated mint tea? Hope, foolish and oxygenated, rose until she pressed her back to the glass, steadying herself against her own heartbeat and refusing dull, purchased certainty tonight. Reason gathered itself and argued. If he lived, where had he been when headlines tore through her house like harmattan wind? Why now, after seasons of reinvention, after she stitched her days together with appointments and travel? She replayed the voice, measuring cadence against memory, the way a tailor measures inseams. The fit felt frighteningly exact. Yet scams thrive because they borrow truth. She poured water, forgot to drink, and paced the gallery, past bronze masks, past photographs of runways where she smiled convincingly beneath catastrophic mascara after long interviews. When the phone vibrated again, she snatched it, braced for disappointment, found instead a message without greeting. No number she recognized, just a single attachment pulsing like a heartbeat on glass. She tapped. The photo filled the screen. Obinna on their garden steps, the same dimple splitting his left cheek, but older jawline sharpened, eyes weathered, hair cropped close as if life had insisted on discipline. Behind him, a bougainvillea spilled reckless color. Time had continued for him inside the image. Nnenna's breath fractured. The screen brightened, waiting for her answer. The days that followed blurred into a haze of restless mornings and sleepless nights. Lagos felt suddenly claustrophobic. Every passing glance from staff, every whispered conversation in corridors carried suspicion. Nnenna Okorie, queen of composure, had become a woman pacing her glass mansion with her phone clutched like an amulet. She could not speak to anyone, not her assistant, not her friends in the elite social circuit for fear of ridicule. They would call it grief's madness, yet her heart throbbed with the echo of that voice. When the second message came, she read it a dozen times before replying. The words were simple. "Meet me in Abuja, no one must know." Her fingers trembled as she typed back, "Where?" The answer arrived swiftly, accompanied by an address of a discreet lounge tucked within an exclusive Abuja hotel, a place known for shielding billionaires from paparazzi and politicians from scandal. She closed her eyes, fighting the storm inside her. Abuja was far from the chatter of Lagos society, far from the fashion editors and gossip blogs waiting for her slightest misstep. It was the only place she could risk going. When she told her staff she needed solitude for a creative retreat, no one questioned her. Privacy was part of her legend. But beneath the flowing caftan she wore to the airport, she layered a plain scarf, oversized glasses, and a modest wig, her disguise. The woman stepping into her private jet looked nothing like the luminous Nnenna Okorie splashed across magazines. The Abuja skyline greeted her with dignified quiet compared to Lagos's chaos. Convoys rolled through boulevards, security men loitered near ministries, and the air carried a restrained hush of power. Yet within her, power gave way to trembling vulnerability. The car brought her directly to the hotel. She walked through dim corridors until she reached the lounge. Candles flickered on mahogany tables, jazz floated faintly from unseen speakers, and heavy curtains blocked the world outside. She chose a corner seat, her pulse roaring in her ears. Every man who walked through the entrance made her stomach lurch with nervous anticipation, until finally, one figure paused at the door, her breath caught. He walked slowly, shoulders squared yet carrying invisible weight. A faint scar traced the line of his jaw, and time had carved definition into features once soft with youth. But the eyes, those eyes stilled her heart. Eyes that once pleaded for extra time before bedtime. Eyes that sparkled at Christmas fireworks. Eyes that mirrored her own. He stopped in front of her table. For a long, suspended moment, they simply stared. She clutched the edge of her chair to keep from collapsing. "Mother," he whispered, voice trembling like fragile glass. The word ripped through her. Her lips parted, but sound failed her. Could grief trick her senses this deeply? Was her longing so fierce that her mind had conjured him into being? She reached out halfway, then froze, pulling her hand back. This is impossible," she said, her voice strained. "I know," he replied softly, "but I am here. They never wanted you to know the truth." Her mind reeled. The crash, the coffin, the condolences, all of it had been documented, final. Yet here sat a man wearing Obinna's eyes, Obinna's voice, Obinna's very essence. "Who are you?" she asked again, though her heart already feared the answer. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "The night of the crash, it was not an accident. It was a cover-up. I survived, but they needed the world to believe I was gone. Someone close ensured it." Her throat tightened, words caught between rage and disbelief. "Do you know what you're saying?" she asked, voice sharp with trembling. "I know exactly what I'm saying." His eyes did not waver. "The people you trusted most, one of them orchestrated everything. They wanted me erased, Mother. They feared what I would become." Her world tilted. The empire she had built, the family she had tolerated, the alliances she had maintained, all of it felt suddenly fragile, rotten beneath a polished surface. She wanted to rise, to embrace him, to press her cheek against his and finally allow the dam of tears to break. Yet fear clamped her still. If this was real, it meant betrayal lived closer than she imagined. She stared at him, studying every detail, the faint scar above his brow, the way he clenched his hands as Obinna used to when nervous, the familiar tremor in his lower lip. Logic fought faith inside her chest, but even logic began to surrender under the weight of maternal recognition. "I buried my son," she whispered. "I stood by his coffin." "They never showed you the truth," he said firmly. "They showed you what they wanted you to see." Her breath shuddered, and she pressed her palm against her chest to steady her racing heart. "Who?" she demanded. "Who did this?" He leaned closer, his face shadowed under the dim light, his voice steady but laced with pain. "Someone in this family never wanted me alive." The words hung between them like poison, leaving her suspended between terror and desperate hope. The flight back to Lagos was silent, but Nnenna's mind churned like a restless ocean. She stared out of the window, watching the city lights below dissolve into darkness, her reflection fragmented against the glass. The words from Abuja lingered in her chest like a bruise. "Someone in this family never wanted me alive." Family. That word had once been her sanctuary. Now it felt like a dagger. The name that kept circling her thoughts was one she had spent years tolerating, sometimes resenting, but never openly confronting. Taye Okorie, her late husband's younger brother. Taye was everything a public figure should be: charming, articulate, a philanthropist with foundations in education and clean water, a regular donor at church. He was the darling of high society, always photographed with governors, CEOs, and celebrities. Where she was elegance and quiet command, he was affable charisma, a smile that drew trust like moths to a flame. But beneath the polished surface, Nnenna had long sensed an undercurrent she could never fully place. She remembered family dinners where Taye's laughter was a little too loud, his questions about Obinna's education a little too pointed, his suggestions about business strategy a little too insistent. There was ambition there, ravenous, tightly caged but never fully hidden. In the early years after her husband's death, Taye had been helpful, almost overly so. He attended board meetings, handled logistics, and presented himself as her shield against cutthroat competitors. Yet, she remembered moments when she caught him speaking too comfortably with investors, as though positioning himself as co-leader rather than advisor. She had brushed it off then, attributing it to family closeness. But now, replaying those moments through the lens of the young man's warning, they looked darker, sharper, menacing. She thought of the discrepancies she had noticed once: a supplier account overcharged by millions, funds quietly rerouted. When she raised it, Taye had smiled, waved it off as a clerical error, and promised to correct it. And he had. Or so it seemed. Nnenna had been drowning in grief, unable to focus on the small print of ledgers. She had let it slide, telling herself family loyalty came first. But could Taye have plotted Obinna's end? Her chest tightened at the thought. It seemed unthinkable, monstrous. Yet, the young man's words gnawed at her. His conviction, his trembling voice, it had not sounded like invention. Back in her mansion, the air felt heavier. She noticed things she had never given attention to before. Hushed conversations that ended abruptly when she entered a room, the way her driver avoided her eyes, the gardener who now lingered near the veranda longer than necessary. Even Amaka, her trusted assistant, seemed unusually nervous, tapping her pen during meetings, glancing at her phone too often. For the first time in years, Her empire felt less like a fortress and more like a cage lined with mirrors, each reflection watching her instead of protecting her. That evening, she walked through the long hallway lined with framed photographs. There was one of her husband at their wedding, his smile warm, his arm wrapped firmly around her. Another of Obinna at age 10, balancing on the piano bench, grinning triumphantly. And tucked discreetly near the end of the corridor, a portrait of Taye, standing beside her husband at a charity gala. His eyes in that photo now unsettled her. Too sharp. Too calculating. The young man's insistence returned to her. Taye is the key. Her logical mind battled with her maternal instinct. Logic whispered that grief and longing made her vulnerable, that she could be manipulated by anyone clever enough to mimic her son. But her heart, her mother's heart, felt the pulse of truth in every word spoken in Abuja. And if Taye truly was involved, then she had been dining with betrayal for years, blind to the danger. Later that night, she descended into the sitting room, craving silence to think. The chandeliers glowed softly, casting golden shadows across the polished floor. She expected the room to be empty. Instead, she froze mid-step. Someone was already there. In her leather armchair, legs casually crossed, sat Nnenna Okorie. No announcement, no call, no request to visit. He was simply there, like he owned the place. A half-filled glass of her whiskey sat on the side table beside him. "Taye," she whispered, her voice taut with shock. "What are you doing here?" He turned his head slowly, and the smile that stretched across his lips was calm, deliberate, and terrifyingly knowing. The silence between them thickened, pressing on her chest, as if every wall in the mansion leaned closer to hear what would come next. By morning, Lagos was buzzing with whispers. Banana Island gossip had a way of traveling faster than light, slipping through marble corridors into boardrooms and high-end salons. Nnenna Okorie's absence from public view these last few days had not gone unnoticed, and now small rumors had begun to weave themselves into full-fledged narratives. At cocktail parties, socialites leaned close and whispered, "She's unraveling." In boardrooms, investors frowned, muttering, "Her judgment is slipping." Once a fortress of stability, trembled under the weight of speculation. Clients in Paris and Milan sent polite but sharp messages, expressing concern about leadership continuity. Long-time investors grew wary, scheduling emergency meetings. Journalists prowled for stories of weakness, eager to paint a fallen queen. In Lagos high society, perception was as powerful as profit, and right now, perception was her greatest enemy. And into that vacuum of doubt stepped Nnenna Okorie. With practiced ease, he cast himself as the stabilizing force. He assured investors that everything was under control, that he was merely helping his sister-in-law through a difficult emotional period. His charm, his public donations, his effortless speeches about legacy and resilience, these things made him appear like the savior the empire needed. Board members who once deferred entirely to Nnenna now listened to Taye with careful interest, nodding as he spoke. Nnenna could feel the ground shifting beneath her. In meetings, eyes lingered on her too long, searching for cracks. Suggestions she made were quietly questioned. Even Amaka, though loyal, glanced at her with concern more often than before. Meanwhile, the young man, the one who bore Obinna's eyes and voice, was becoming impatient. He called her almost daily, his voice urgent. "Mother, you must tell them. You must show them I am alive. If you don't, Taye will take everything." But Nnenna could not. The world was not ready to accept a son resurrected from death. To reveal him now, without certainty of safety, could destroy them both. The tabloids would feast on the scandal. Investors would flee. And worst of all, Taye would have every reason to strike again. Her silence, however, strained the fragile bond between them. Each time she delayed, his tone grew harder, tinged with disappointment. He could not understand the balance she carried between love and empire, between instinct and strategy. The pressure mounted, and her body began to betray her. At a prestigious gala dinner hosted at the Echo Convention Center, she felt the walls closing in. The chandeliers shimmered like cruel stars as whispers floated around the room. "She looks thinner. Did you hear? She canceled her Paris trip. They say she spends nights talking to herself." Her palms sweated, her pulse quickened. When the host called her name to give a brief address, she rose, determined to display her usual poise. But halfway to the stage, The room spun violently. She collapsed against the polished floor, the sound of gasps rising around her. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. She regained consciousness minutes later, attendants helping her sit, but the damage had been done. By dawn, headlines screamed across online platforms. Nnenna Okorie collapses at gala. Is the empire at risk? The image of her being carried away in a sequined gown circulated endlessly, sparking debate. Investors panicked. Some began discreet talks with Taye. The board whispered about contingency leadership. And Lagos society, hungry for spectacle, turned her collapse into another tale of a dynasty on the brink. At the mansion, Amaka watched her employer with worried eyes. She brought meals Nnenna barely touched, reminded her of appointments she ignored, and hesitated before asking the question that had been burning inside her. "Madam, is something wrong? Something you're not telling me?" Nnenna looked at her assistant, the young woman who had been like a daughter in loyalty and service, and for the first time, she considered confessing everything. But fear sealed her lips. To speak was to endanger them all, so she smiled weakly, whispering, "I'm only tired, Amaka. Just tired." But Amaka was not convinced. She began to watch more closely, noticing the late-night calls, the way Nnenna sometimes whispered into her phone with trembling hands, the moments when her eyes filled with a longing that could not be explained by business pressures alone. And then came the package. The loan, delivered with no return address. It sat on the polished foyer table until curiosity overcame her. She sliced it open carefully, her heart hammering in her chest. Inside, beneath layers of plain wrapping, lay a small, worn object, a wooden toy car, faded with time. She recognized it instantly. It was Obinna's childhood toy, the one he had carved clumsily in primary school, the one he had refused to part with even when surrounded by every luxury imaginable. She had kept it once in his room, tucked away on a shelf. After his death, she never saw it again. Her hands shook violently as she lifted it from the box. The weight of memory nearly buckled her knees. Someone had returned a piece of her son. But who? And why now? The mansion, once her sanctuary, now felt like a stage filled with unseen eyes. The walls themselves seemed to whisper, and in her chest, the question pounded louder than ever. Had her son truly returned, or was someone playing the cruelest game of all? The toy car lay in Nnenna's hands like an artifact unearthed from another life. Its chipped edges, its uneven paint strokes, the faint scratch where Obinna had once tried to carve his initials, it was unmistakably his, not a replica, not something money could duplicate. This was the very toy he had clutched through childhood, the one he had stubbornly carried to boarding school until teachers forced him to leave it behind. She locked herself away in her study, drawing the curtains against the world outside. For hours, she sat with the toy pressed to her chest, rocking silently as memories pressed in. She saw Obinna at 5, racing the wooden car across marble floors. At 10, refusing a diamond-studded toy gifted by a governor's wife because, "Mummy, this one is better. It's mine." The mansion had echoed with his laughter then. Now it echoed with whispers. But how had the toy returned, and who had placed it in her hands? The questions multiplied until suspicion turned inward. Amaka. Could it be her? The assistant had access to every room, every schedule. She was loyal, yes, but loyalty had limits, especially when money or influence entered the equation. Had Amaka leaked secrets? Was she feeding Taye information? Nnenna's heart clenched as she replayed every glance, every hesitation in Amaka's recent behavior. Trust was eroding like sand underwater. That night, the phone rang again, the same hidden number. Her hands trembled as she answered. "Mother," the voice said, calm, steady, unshaken by her silence. "Where did you get it?" she demanded. "The toy. Tell me." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "I kept it all these years. I told you I never died. They lied to you." Her breathing quickened. "If you are truly Obinna, prove it. Tell me something no one else knows." He did. In a soft tone, he recounted details of a business deal from years ago, an early investment she had made in Ankara textile mills. He remembered the supplier's name, the clauses in the contract, even the number of nights she had stayed awake adjusting figures. It was impossible knowledge for an outsider. She nearly dropped the phone, yet reason clawed at her again. Could someone have stolen Obinna's files? Could this be an elaborate scheme to destabilize her? Lagos was a city where ambition walked hand in hand with betrayal. Everyone wanted a piece of the empire she had built. Her mansion no longer felt like home. It was a cage, its glass walls too transparent, its staff too watchful. She moved through the halls at night, barefoot, clutching the toy car, feeling as though the portraits of her family were whispering behind her. Even the chandeliers seemed to glitter suspiciously, like eyes. She could not endure uncertainty much longer. She needed truth, not whispers. So, she arranged it. Quietly. Without Amaka, without the board, without anyone knowing. A hidden DNA test. When next she met the young man, the one with Obinna's eyes and scars, she did not embrace him. Instead, she insisted he accompany her to a discreet private clinic in Ikoyi. Her tone was firm, her face unreadable. He agreed without hesitation, almost relieved. The clinic was small, tucked inside a gated compound, its walls painted a calming cream. Discretion was its currency. Blood samples were taken swiftly, mouths swabbed, paperwork signed under pseudonyms. Nnenna sat in the waiting room, her manicured fingers clenched so tightly they drew crescents in her palms. For days afterward, she existed in a limbo of dread. She tried to continue with her duties, but her mind was trapped between two possibilities. If the result was false, she would be exposed as a grieving fool. Her entire world would tilt on its axis. Meanwhile, the board pressed harder. At the latest meeting, whispers of succession planning became open suggestions. "You have done well for decades, Nnenna," one member said, feigning sympathy. "Perhaps it is time to rest, to let new energy lead." She saw Taye across the table, his hands steepled, his smile polite, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a predator closing in. She left the meeting with her pulse drumming in her ears. At home, Amaka intercepted her, concern etched across her face. "Madam, please, you're not well. People are saying things. If you keep secrets, they will use them against you." Nnenna wanted to scream the truth, to confide in this young woman who had carried her burdens for years, but fear locked her jaw. So she dismissed Amaka with a brittle smile and retreated to her study once more, the toy car clutched tight. Then the envelope came. Cream-colored, sealed in plain packaging, slid under her study door as if the walls themselves had delivered it. She tore it open with trembling hands. Inside lay the report. Her eyes scanned the sterile language, heart hammering as each word seared itself into her mind. Probability of maternity, 99.9%. The paper slipped from her fingers. She staggered back, collapsing into her chair, her chest heaving with sobs she had not allowed herself in years. Her son, her Obinna, was alive, and nothing in her world would ever be the same again. Arrived on letterhead, cold and clinical, yet it detonated inside her chest. DNA proved what love had insisted. Obinna lived. Nnenna pressed the report to her heart and wept, grateful and afraid. Relief poured through her veins, washing color back into the rooms, but her mind resisted the flood. What could science not account for memory's treachery, the possibility of performance? She stared at him across her study that evening, measuring his face against past photographs, comparing the tilt of his smile, the gentle ache in his eyes. She needed answers, not only echoes. "Where were you?" Her voice, usually velvet and command, sounded like paper rubbed thin. He began slowly, as if each syllable carried weight. "After the crash," he said. Strangers moved him under cover of darkness, to a bungalow outside Ibadan, then to Port Harcourt, then across borders, where he learned to camouflage hunger with discipline. He changed names, learned new accents, folded himself into crowds. Every city offered survival, never belonging. Every sunset reminded him of Lagos and the piano he left behind. He spoke of rooms without windows and markets alive with bargaining, of motor parks where departures felt like second chances. He found work repairing phones, then tailoring, then data entry for a logistics ring that paid in cash and silence. He read the news at night in cybercafes, tracing her success like constellations. Guilt swelled whenever he saw her photograph, regal and solitary. He promised himself he would return when he could protect her with proof, not stories. Time, meanwhile, hardened him. carving responsibility where innocence once lived. "Why didn't you call me?" The question escaped before she could brace for its answer. He swallowed, eyes glistening. "Because grief can be a trap," he said. "I was afraid you would rush toward me and the people watching would finish what they started. I carried your name everywhere like contraband. Forgive me." The voice faltered, the apology trembling over old shame. Nnenna's pride lifted its chin, unsatisfied, but her love reached out anyway. Still, belief wrestled with doubt, and the distance between chair and embrace measured an ocean. They tried dinner, a ritual of normalcy served on porcelain. The chef prepared okra soup beside jollof, bright as celebration, grilled prawns glistening under lemon. They sat across from each other like diplomats negotiating a fragile ceasefire. Conversation started, stalled, restarted. He asked about the atelier's new line. She asked whether he still wrote music. They laughed at the wrong times, cried without warning. When he reached for water, she noticed the faint tremor in his fingers and hid her own shaking by smoothing her napkin. Hunger visited. Appetite hesitated. Later, he wandered to his old room, preserved by time and her refusal to surrender memory. The curtains remained the same deep blue, his posters curled at the edges. The piano stool awaited his weight like a loyal friend. He picked up the metronome, set it ticking, then stopped it, startled by the intimacy of sound. She stood in the doorway, afraid to cross the threshold, afraid not to. His smile softened. "You kept everything." She nodded, unable to say she had kept it because dismantling it felt like dismantling hope. The absence between them weighed more than the years. She looked at the man and searched for the boy who once asked whether money could buy more time. He looked at the woman and searched for the mother who wore strength like fragrance. What they found was each other, changed yet tethered. They toured memory carefully, touching photographs as if they might burn. On the balcony, city lights blinked like a patient heartbeat. He confessed nightmares that smell like petrol and rain. She confessed mornings where success felt like betrayal. By morning, purpose replaced paralysis. Over tea, he spoke clearly about the future. He wanted training across departments, access to budgets, a pathway to leadership built on competence, not sentiment. He believed the brand could expand digital couture, collaborate with tech to personalize fit at scale, build ateliers that paid seamstresses profit shares. His sentences carried both apology and audacity, a son requesting the chance to earn what legacy had promised. She listened, pride and caution braided tightly, remembering how power attracts knives. "We will chart it properly," she said, and quietly. They sketched discrete timelines, tested trust with small assignments, and invented covers for his presence in the building. She introduced him to a handful of veterans as a consultant on heritage archiving, a role that explained his access without inviting scrutiny. Progress, fragile but real, began to breathe. Then the board started calling twice daily. Rumors, they said, demanded certainty. Investors wanted continuity. Taye's charm toured offices like a traveling show, promising steady hands. Nnenna kept her voice calm, yet inside she felt the floorboards loosen. Hope, new and tender, needed shelter. That afternoon, as rain stitched silver lines across the lagoon, a calendar alert slid onto her phone. Emergency family briefing. 5 p.m. She frowned. She had scheduled nothing. Moments later, a company-wide email arrived, elegant and ruthless in its brevity. From Nnenna Okorie. Subject: Family restructuring. Words assembled like a blade. A refreshed leadership architecture. An executive chair advisory. A transition roadmap to safeguard heritage. Beneath, an invitation to the press for a private briefing at dusk. Nnenna felt the room contract. Across from her, her son looked up. "They've started," he said. The boardroom of Okorie Global Holdings had always been a stage where Nnenna reigned with quiet majesty. Its long glass table reflected the Lagos skyline, its walls adorned with awards, photographs of international runway shows, and press clippings celebrating decades of fashion dominance. For years, her voice was the only compass, her word final, her presence unquestioned. But that morning, the atmosphere was different, thick with tension, eyes darting toward the head of the table, where Taye Okorie now presided with the smooth confidence of a man who knew the winds had shifted. He rose slowly, hands clasped, voice modulated for sympathy but sharpened for attack. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, scanning the faces of board members and investors. Our beloved Nnenna has carried this empire with strength beyond measure. But grief, as we know, can be a heavy chain. Perhaps it is time to consider fresh energy leadership that ensures the Okorie legacy doesn't falter. The words cut like silk, gentle in tone, devastating in meaning. Around the table, murmurs rippled. Several members exchanged glances, their pens tapping nervously. Some avoided Nnenna's gaze entirely. She lifted her chin, refusing to flinch. "My leadership is not in question," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "This empire was built from my vision, my sacrifices. You speak of legacy, Taye, but you forget whose name this company carries." But Taye was prepared. He tilted his head, smiled faintly. "And no one questions your accomplishments, sister. But investors are nervous, the markets are watching. When leadership wavers, perception suffers. We cannot allow rumors about health, about stability to poison what we've built." It was a dagger wrapped in velvet. He had said nothing outright, yet implied everything. Her fainting at the gala, her recent seclusion, the whispers that had stalked her, he packaged them neatly into a narrative of fragility. Investors shifted in their seats, their silence an unspoken verdict. Already, a few had begun discreet withdrawals, pulling capital into safer ventures. The empire was bleeding slowly, invisibly, and Taye was ready to claim the throne. And then the door opened. The young man walked in. He moved with quiet resolve, dressed simply in a tailored suit, his face partially hidden by glasses. Gasps rippled across the room. Some frowned, others leaned forward, curious. Nnenna's pulse thundered. He had insisted on attending, though officially he was no one to the company, no shareholder, no director. Yet his presence carried weight, a living question mark in the flesh. "I am sorry for the intrusion," he began, voice steady but resonant. "But what is at stake here is not merely shares or markets. It is legacy. It is family." His words hung in the air, commanding silence. He spoke of the company's origins, how his father dreamed of an empire that celebrated African creativity with global prestige. He spoke of Nnenna's sacrifices, of nights she worked until dawn, of battles fought with international giants to carve out a place for Nigerian fashion on the world stage. He invoked words Obinna once said to her, in private phrases only he could have known. Some board members stirred, their eyes softening, their skepticism cracking. But Taye stood, clapping slowly, his smile sharp. "Impressive," he drawled. "Very moving. But let us not be deceived by imposters and actors. This young man claims blood. But what proof has he shown? DNA reports can be forged. Stories rehearsed. Shall we gamble the future of billions on a performance?" The air thickened. Tension coiled around the room like smoke. One faction leaned toward Nnenna, unwilling to dismiss what they had just witnessed. Another shifted toward Taye, preferring the safety of his calculated assurances. The empire stood at a crossroads, its throne contested not by strangers but by blood. Outside, the media had caught wind. Rumors spread like wildfire. Mystery heir challenges, Okorie leadership. Blogs speculated about a hidden son. Tabloids whispered of family secrets. Hashtags trended overnight, dissecting grainy photographs of the young man slipping into boardrooms. Some dismissed him as a fraud, others insisted the resemblance was undeniable. Inside the mansion that evening, Nnenna sat in silence, staring at her reflection. For the first time, she realized her silence, her refusal to publicly acknowledge him, was costing her everything. Each day she hesitated. Taye grew stronger, and her empire crumbled under uncertainty. But to reveal him was to place him directly in the line of fire. She was still weighing the impossible choice when her phone buzzed with notifications. Her breath caught as she opened social media. A video. Already viral. The young man sitting at a piano, laughter tumbling from his lips, his fingers dancing across the keys with the same playful precision Obinna once displayed. His smile, his dimple, the melody there was no mistaking it. The caption read, "Could this be Obinna Okorie, alive after all?" The world had seen him now, and nothing could be undone. Lagos woke up to a storm. The viral piano video spread like fire through dry harmattan air, consuming timelines, breakfast tables, and boardrooms. On Twitter, hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Number Obinna returns, number Okorie, number mystery son. Instagram reels replayed his laughter, slowed his smile into cinematic fragments, and compared side-by-side photos of the boy who had once graced magazine covers with his mother. On WhatsApp groups, aunties forwarded the clip with voice notes declaring, "God is wonderful, the boy no die after all." By noon, the scandal had eclipsed Fashion Week in Milan. At Nnenna Lux's show in Paris, models strutted in flowing Ankara silks, but the press coverage focused on one question: was the dead Okorie heir alive? The collections were praised, but articles ended with the same paragraph, yet all eyes remain on Lagos, where rumors swirl about a family resurrection. Back home, Lagos turned the matter into theater. In Balogun Market, traders abandoned bargaining to argue. A woman selling lace fabric swore, "Na himo, see the dimple, see the piano hand." A shoe seller shook his head, laughing. "Abeg, na fraudster. Lagos get plenty boys wey sabi act." Voices rose, mixing Yoruba, Igbo, and Pidgin into a symphony of gossip. In salons from Surulere to Ikoyi, customers leaned back in chairs debating whether Nnenna was mad, blessed, or deceived. The elites were divided. Some, softened by memory, whispered sympathy. They remembered little Obinna at charity balls, polite and promising. They wanted to believe in miracles. Others mocked cruelly, calling it a soap opera, predicting Nnenna's empire would collapse under delusion. At a champagne brunch on Victoria Island, a socialite laughed loudly. What next? Will her late husband also walk through the door? Laughter followed, sharp as broken glass. Within the mansion, Nnenna's world constricted further. She closed her doors, canceled public appearances, and let curtains fall heavy over her glass walls. The phone rang with journalists demanding comment. Cameras camped outside the gates. Drones hovered above, capturing aerial shots of the compound. She moved through her rooms like a shadow, every step weighted with the humiliation of being spectacle. The young man, however, felt something different: fame's pull. For years, he had lived nameless, faceless, voiceless, in backstreets of foreign cities. Now, the city was calling his name. Strangers debated his existence. Hashtags carried his face. He scrolled through feeds at night, seeing comments that said, "Our prince has returned." His heart swelled with a dangerous mixture of validation and longing. For the first time, he felt the empire could be his. And Nnenna noticed it in the way he carried himself, shoulders higher, voice louder. "You must be careful," she warned, her tone tight with fear. "Fame is no friend. Today they love you. Tomorrow they destroy you." But her words struggled against the title, a force of recognition sweeping him away. Amaka, always observant, was more blunt. One evening she cornered Nnenna in the study, her voice urgent. "Madam, this thing is getting out of hand. The press, the gossip, it will destroy both of you if you don't manage it. Already, people are saying you've lost control. If you don't speak soon, Taye will." The truth of it burned. Nnenna's silence had given Taye time to orchestrate his narrative. Investors grew restless. The final blow came when one of their largest European partners, an investor who had been with them for over a decade, sent a curt message withdrawing from a pending deal worth millions. The reason cited was vague: instability in leadership, but the meaning was clear. The scandal had made them a liability. That night, Nnenna stood in her bedroom, staring at the Lagos skyline. It glittered with merciless beauty, indifferent to her pain. The empire she had built was slipping through her fingers, and all because she could not decide whether to publicly embrace her son or shield him from the storm. The young man found her by the window. "Mother," he said softly, "we cannot hide forever. If you don't acknowledge me, they will continue to doubt. Let me stand beside you. Let me prove to them who I am." She turned, her eyes brimming with exhaustion. "Do you think the world is gentle, that they will welcome you without tearing you apart first? Obinna, fame is a fire. Once you step inside it, you cannot control how it burns." His jaw tightened. "But if I do nothing, Taye wins, and I will not let him." They argued late into the night, their words tangled with love and fear, pride and desperation. Finally, drained, Nnenna went to bed, clutching the toy car like a lifeline. When dawn broke, the mansion was too quiet. Sunlight spilled across empty hallways, and servants moved nervously, whispering among themselves. Amaka knocked on the young man's door to call him for breakfast. No. Answer. She knocked again. Harder. Still silence. She pushed the door open and found the room empty. The bed untouched. Nnenna rushed in moments later, her breath catching as her eyes swept across the space. His suitcases were gone. His phone, gone. The only thing left was silence. Her son, her rediscovered miracle, had disappeared without a trace. The mansion felt hollow without him. Rooms that had briefly warmed with laughter returned to silence, each echo reminding Nnenna of how fragile miracles were. She moved through the house like a ghost, listening for footsteps that never came, for the sound of piano keys that stayed mute. Her empire might have been burning outside, but inside she battled a deeper fire, the fear that she had found her son only to lose him again. Restlessness drove her into the city. She dismissed her driver one evening, insisting on solitude. Wrapped in a simple shawl, glasses hiding her face, she took the wheel herself. Lagos at night was a paradox, horns blaring, markets glowing, music thumping from clubs, yet threaded with moments of piercing stillness. She drove with no destination, guided only by memory. First, she stopped by a dusty football field in Surulere, where Obinna had once played with neighborhood boys. She parked and watched children chasing the ball, their laughter rising above the cracked asphalt. She remembered how he had run barefoot once, his designer shoes abandoned in favor of freedom, dust painting his legs. Tears welled, and she wiped them quickly before starting the car again. Her next stop was a small church, tucked between shops and apartment blocks. Once upon a time, Obinna had sung in its choir, his voice bright and sure even as a boy. She slipped inside, unnoticed in the shadows. Candles flickered at the altar, casting golden light on the wooden cross. She sat in a back pew, folded her hands, and let the hymn of memory wash over her. "Lord, keep him safe," she whispered. The prayer both past and present. From there, she visited family friends. One, an elderly seamstress who had once tutored Obinna in fabric cutting, welcomed her with tears. "He was different, Nnenna," the woman said, her voice trembling. "He had respect. He had vision. Even as a child, I knew he would change something in this world." Another friend, a retired banker, spoke of Obinna's curiosity, how he once asked detailed questions about accounts during a dinner party. Each memory was a knife and a balm, reminding her of all she had lost, yet stitching hope that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't lost him entirely. Driving back across Third Mainland Bridge, Lagos lights reflected on the water like scattered jewels. Her grief surged, stronger than in years, but this time it mingled with a dangerous hope. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel at a red light, whispering his name, "Obinna, Obinna." That night, her phone finally buzzed, a message, "Mother, I am safe. Don't be afraid." Relief and anger collided inside her. She typed back furiously, "Where are you? Why did you leave me again?" Minutes felt like hours before the reply came. "I needed space. The city is suffocating me. I had to think, to breathe, to find myself. I couldn't stay in that mansion with the walls watching me." Tears blurred her vision. She called him immediately, and this time he answered. His voice, though strained, carried the same tremor of guilt she had heard before. "I couldn't bear to see you torn apart, Mother," he confessed. "Every day I am here, the empire shakes more. Taye grows stronger. I thought leaving would protect you." "Protect me?" she snapped, her voice breaking. "Do you know what it does to a mother to lose her son twice?" "I cannot survive it again, Obinna. You don't need to protect me, I need to protect you." The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, he sighed. "I will come back, but you must understand Taye will never stop. He has tasted the throne. He will not let go unless you push me aside." Her jaw tightened. "Then let him come. Let him try. I have faced the world before without fear, and I will do it again. You are my son. No one, no board, no gossip, no Taye will take that from me." For the first time in weeks, her voice carried certainty. A vow formed inside her like steel. She would fight for him, not just as a mother but as a leader unwilling to surrender. But certainty shattered hours later when her phone rang. This time, it was Taye. His tone was smooth, almost cordial, but the menace beneath was unmistakable. "Nnenna," he said, "you have always been a visionary. Do not let grief blind you now. This boy parading as Obinna will destroy everything. The investors are restless. The board is divided. You must think of the empire, not your emotions. Her grip on the phone tightened. What are you saying, Taye? I'm offering you a deal, he said calmly. Abandon the impostor. Distance yourself. Denounce him if you must. Do this, and the empire survives. Refuse, and you lose everything. The line went silent, leaving her alone in her study, the chandelier above flickering as though the house itself trembled with the weight of choice. The summons came under the guise of reconciliation. Taye sent word that a private family gathering had been arranged at his Ikoyi residence, a sprawling compound that carried the scent of old wealth and calculated power. Nnenna hesitated, but refusing would only fuel the whispers. So she arrived, dressed in understated elegance, a silk wrapper and a coral necklace, her expression composed though her heart rattled like loose glass inside her chest. The living room was already full when she entered. Aunts, uncles, cousins, faces from both near and distant branches of the Okorie tree sat in plush chairs, their voices low, their eyes sharp with curiosity. At the center stood Taye, immaculate in a tailored agbada, his smile wide but his gaze cold. Nnenna, he greeted, stretching his arms as though welcoming her into warmth. We are family. Today we must speak truth, for the sake of the empire. She sat without replying, her posture regal, her silence louder than any greeting. The meeting began with measured tones but quickly descended into pressure. One relative, a portly uncle with a booming voice, leaned forward. Nnenna, we respect your pain, but this boy you cling to, he is a distraction. Legacy matters more than emotion. Do not let grief endanger what we have built. Another aunt, her jail towering like a crown, added sharply, we cannot let scandal define the Okorie name. If you continue, the empire will collapse, and what will remain? Ruins, all because you cannot let go of the past. Their words struck her like stones. Around the room, nods and murmurs of agreement grew. Taye watched quietly, his hands folded, letting the chorus do his work. Inside, Nnenna wrestled with herself. Logic presented its cold case. Choose the empire, protect decades of work, sacrifice one for the many. Emotion countered with fire. A mother does not abandon her child, not once, not twice. Her heart reeled between them, torn by the weight of decision. Her mind drifted back to her husband, gone so many years now. She remembered his voice one late night, long before his death, when Obinna had fallen asleep on his chest. He had looked at her with solemn eyes and whispered, no matter what happens, promise me you will always protect him. Not the company, not the name him. The memory landed like a stone in still water, rippling through her doubt. She rose slowly, every eye following her. The room hushed. My son, she began, her voice steady, is not a distraction. He is not a scandal. He is flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood. The empire you speak of? It was built for him. I will not choose between him and the company, because he is the company's true heir, and I will stand by him no matter the cost. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Some relatives shifted uneasily, others frowned openly, but in that moment, Nnenna felt lighter, as though she had set down a burden she had carried too long. The young man, her son, stepped forward from the shadows where he had been standing. His eyes shone, not with tears this time, but with resolve. Mother is right, he said, his voice steady. The empire is not dying, it is waiting to be reborn. I will not let it crumble under rumors. I will rebuild it with her, with new vision, with new strength. The Okorie name will not fall. It will rise again. The conviction in his tone startled even the most skeptical relatives. For the first time, they did not see just a boy returned from rumor. They saw a man ready to shoulder legacy. Nnenna looked at him, pride swelling in her chest, her decision affirmed. Against all odds, they stood together now, not as broken fragments, but as a force forged by loss and rediscovery. But Taye, who had remained silent throughout, finally moved. He rose slowly from his chair, his agbada flowing around him like shadows. His smile had vanished, replaced with a look colder than stone. He did not shout, did not argue. He simply walked toward the door. As he reached it, he paused, turning back just enough for his eyes to meet Nnenna's. They glimmered with something unspoken: threat, promise, warning. Then, without a word, he stepped out, leaving silence thick as smoke behind him. Every relative in the room shifted uneasily, sensing that though a declaration had been made, the war for the Okorie Empire had only just begun. The storm did not pass overnight. The Okorie Empire staggered beneath the weight of scandal, gossip, and investor retreat. Contracts dissolved quietly, showrooms stood emptier than before, and headlines replayed every stumble as if predicting an empire's final breath. Yet Nnenna, who had weathered grief sharper than markets, refused to surrender. She stood with her son beside her, her chin lifted, her silence no longer retreat but defiance. Together, they began again. The early months were brutal. Shareholders called for reassurance, and competitors circled like vultures, eager to snatch what weakness left behind. But the young man, no longer merely her son but her ally, stepped into the fire with a resolve that startled many. He proposed strategies that seemed radical at first: digital couture lines, virtual fittings powered by AI, interactive fashion experiences streamed globally. He spoke of sustainability not as charity but as core profit. The board resisted, yet his confidence swayed them, little by little. Nnenna watched him with equal parts awe and tenderness. She had built the empire with needle and thread, with fabric cut by hand and reputation won stitch by stitch. He approached it with algorithms, with vision for an online future. Where she saw tradition, he saw transformation. They argued, yes, fierce debates across dining tables about pace and risk. But beneath each clash was a current of mutual respect, a recognition that empire required both wisdom and innovation. Together, they forged a rhythm. She teaching him the unspoken codes of elite circles, he teaching her how to let the brand breathe in digital spaces. And gradually, their empire steadied. Society, once merciless, began to soften. The mystery of his return no longer sparked only mockery but fascination. Fashion editors who once whispered of scandal now published glowing profiles, the heir who reimagined tradition. Influencers wore Nnenna Luxe digital designs on avatars as eagerly as celebrities wore gowns on red carpets. Lagos, fickle in its affections, began to applaud again. Former critics, those who had laughed loudest at her collapse, now marveled at her resilience. Only Nnenna could turn tragedy into triumph, one columnist admitted. She has not just survived, she has reinvented survival in itself. At galas, people approached her with rehearsed sympathy and belated admiration, desperate to be aligned once more with her name. Through it all, Amaka remained by her side. The doubts Nnenna once harbored about her loyalty faded in the face of steady devotion. Amaka handled crises with quiet grace, intercepted journalists, soothed restless staff, and shielded secrets with the care of family. One evening, Nnenna reached for her hand, squeezed it, and whispered, "Forgive me for doubting you." Amaka only smiled, eyes glistening, and replied, "I have always been here, madam." Their bond, tested by shadows, returned stronger. The turning point came with a gala unlike any other. Months of rebuilding culminated in a night designed not just to showcase clothes, but to proclaim rebirth. The venue was transformed into a living gallery. Screens projected digital sketches that bloomed into gowns before guests' eyes. Holograms danced in couture alongside live models. The air hummed with anticipation. Every seat was filled investors, celebrities, journalists, dignitaries. Lagos, Paris, New York, tuned in virtually. The world was watching. Backstage, Nnenna stood in her signature black gown, regal as ever, her presence the foundation of it all. Beside her, her son adjusted his cufflinks, his expression steady but eyes shimmering with nerves. She touched his shoulder gently. "Tonight, you do not prove yourself," she said softly. "You reveal yourself. The world will see not scandal, but strength." When the lights dimmed and the music swelled, he stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed, voices hushed, and for a heartbeat the room was frozen in collective breath. Then he spoke about legacy, about vision, about family. His words carried both fire and humility. He introduced the new collection, each piece a dialogue between tradition and technology, between past and future. Models glided forward, their garments shimmering with stories woven into fabric and code alike. The audience rose to its feet in thunderous applause. From the wings, Nnenna watched, with tears burning in her eyes. The boy she had once tucked into bed, the boy she thought buried, now stood commanding the world. Not as a ghost, not as a rumor, but as a man carrying their name forward. She felt pride swell so fiercely it threatened to break her. By the night's end, the Okorie Empire had been reborn. Contracts once hesitant were renewed. Investors once skeptical pledged loyalty again, and society, fickle yet enthralled, declared the gala a triumph. Later, when the lights dimmed and the hall emptied, Nnenna found a quiet corner. She closed her eyes, let the night's noise fade, and whispered to herself, her voice trembling with gratitude. I answered the call, and he came back to me. What would you do if you were in Nnenna's place? Choose empire or son? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every single one.